So we all just watched the second night of the July 2019 Democratic presidential candidates debates. And now we are very lucky to have an amazing panel of people to talk about the debates tonight. These folks are in the trenches and really working at the front lines of Democratic politics, and I'm very excited and very grateful to all of them for giving us their time tonight to talk about the debates. Zacharie Boisvert is a Los Angeles-based political organizer and consultant. Zacharie got involved in the political world working for environmental nonprofits after the BP oil spill of 2010. During the 2016 presidential cycle, he worked for both the Sanders and Clinton campaigns and has spent the last 2.5 years doing grassroots organizing in California and producing political rallies, events, and trainings for campaigns and political organizations around the country. His goal is to build progressive power to defeat Donald Trump. Dr. Lorrie Frasure-Yokley is an associate professor of political science and African American studies here at UCLA. In fact, in 2015, she became the first woman of color to earn tenure and promotion in the UCLA Poli-Sci department. Her published research examines racial and ethnic political behavior, immigrant political incorporation, African American politics, women in politics, and state and local politics. Her book, Racial and Ethnic Politics in American Suburbs, is the 2016 winner of 2 National Book Awards by the American Political Science Association. Frasure-Yokley is a principal investigator of the collaborative multiracial post-election survey, the first national multiracial, multi-ethnic, multilingual post-election survey of registered and non-registered adults in a presidential election that is 100% user content driven. And she's currently planning another survey of 20,000 respondents following up in the upcoming presidential election. Priscilla Ocen is a professor of law at Loyola Law School, where she teaches criminal law, family law, and a seminar on race, gender, and the law. She's the author of numerous academic articles that examine the relationship between race, gender, and systems of punishment. In addition, she's the co-author of the influential policy report, Black Girls Matter, Overpoliced, Underprotected, and Pushed Out. Professor Ocen is currently the vice chair of the LA County Sheriff's Civilian Oversight Commission, and is a recipient of the inaugural Pan America Writing for Justice Fellowship. In the upcoming academic year, she will complete a Fulbright Fellowship studying the impact of gender-based violence on women's incarceration in Uganda. Adam Winkler is a professor at UCLA School of Law and a specialist in constitutional law, the Supreme Court, and gun policy. His 2018 book called We the Corporations, How American Businesses Won Their Civil Rights, received the Scribes Book Award and was a finalist for the National Book Award, the National Book Critics Circle Award, the ABA Legal Gavel Award, and the California Book Award. He's also the author of Gunfight, The Battle Over the Right to Bear Arms in America, which didn't win any awards, but was once the subject of a question on Jeopardy! He's one of the 20 most cited active law professors in judicial opinions, and his writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Review of Books, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, Slate, and the New Republic. And he's really the expert on gun control issues, so if you have questions about that, you can address them to him tonight. Bill Zimmerman has managed or served as the lead media consultant in nearly 200 political campaigns. His clients include candidates running for every office from mayor to president. Among his many ballot initiative campaigns was California Prop 215, which launched the current effort to legalize marijuana. He helped build MoveOn.org and has worked for the ACLU, the NRDC, and numerous other public interest groups. Bill earned a PhD from the University of Chicago and is the author of Troublemaker, a memoir from the front lines of the 60s. And Bill will be playing the dual role of panelist and moderator tonight. So I'd like to ask them all to come up to the stage. And last night, people asked me to identify them once they were already on the stage. So come on up, and please join me in giving a warm welcome to our panelists. Lorrie Frasure-Yokley, Priscilla Ocen, Adam Winkler, Zacharie Boisvert, and Bill Zimmerman. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. That was quite a raucous debate tonight. Let's see if we can make some sense out of it. In the first debate last night, it seemed like everyone was ganging up against the two leading progressives on the stage. Some opposed them forcefully, some not so forcefully. But this morning, it looked like both went up in the polls as a result. Tonight, it appears, everyone was jumping on Joe. The debate was, the coming attractions for the debate suggested that this was going to be a showdown between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. But instead, it seemed like ganging up on Joe Biden. How do you think, panelists, Joe Biden will come out tomorrow morning when we see the poll results that this morning suggested progress for Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren?
Well, I'll jump in. I mean, predicting the future is hazardous, so I don't really know exactly how it'll come out. But my own reaction was that Biden in the last debate seemed kind of sluggish, and he said himself that he was unprepared. He clearly was prepared tonight. He came out ready to attack Kamala Harris's health care plan. He came out and attacked Cory Booker on his criminal justice record as mayor of Baltimore. He came out prepared and ready to talk about the issues. He was prepared for Senator Gillibrand's attacks on pay equity. I thought one of the interesting things, though, was how awkward at some points Joe Biden also seemed. There were points where he just sort of said, oh, whatever, and moved on. Really unusual was when the moderators would stop the candidates from speaking or try to stop the candidates from speaking, almost every other candidate would finish their sentence and talk to the end. Biden would stop in the middle of a word, like, oh, I don't want to say anything more. I want to be quiet at this point. But he clearly, there was at one point, there was a chart of how much time he had. Because of all the attacks on Biden and the rules allowing him to respond, he had far more time to speak tonight than any other candidate. And it looked by the graph more than double some of the other candidates.
I'm glad to see that he was more prepared than the first debate. However, all of those attacks fell flat. In fact, the very first, I looked at the time, and we were about 40 minutes into the debate, and they were still debating Kamala Harris's Medicare for All plan. He opened a window for the rest of the candidates to try to attack her plan, but instead it gave an opportunity to talk to the American people about her plan and to come off as articulate about her plan. She was calm and poised about her plan. She didn't try to cut people off. She had a great stage presence that continued on from the previous debate. So the first attack, for which he was prepared to give, it fell flat, and it actually opened an opportunity for Kamala Harris to articulate her ideas about Medicare for All. The attack on Cory Booker was just sort of like, why are you spending my time to watch you attack Cory Booker on a debate that was like 10 or 15 years ago? It fell flat, and it didn't provide an opportunity for him to sort of tell us more about what he could do, Joe Biden could do in current times. So that fell flat as well. And Cory Booker is 2% in the polls. So it was really kind of a waste of time to spend that effort to go after him. Joe Biden's handlers need to tell him to apologize. The majority of his supporters are black women. And let me tell you about black women. We are a very forgiving group, right? So when you think about the kinds of attacks that he faced today, his handlers could easily give him ideas about how to position his past to his present and say, you know what, I apologize for some of the mistakes. I atone for some of the mistakes that I made. And present day, they didn't say anything about a need to heal, but it's coming, right? In present day, do something to atone for things that you regret, but to show black women that you actually have some regrets. And I think that will go a long way with showing that he's grown and he's evolved. But all of the attacks, whether he was prepared or not, they fell flat.
And I don't know if that he was that much more prepared. I do agree that he was more prepared than the first debate, but in terms of the attacks that he was attempting to level, and on both Kamala Harris and Cory Booker, they lacked the specificity that I was hoping for. I mean, I wanted Kamala Harris's record as a prosecutor to be litigated. And he missed the mark. You know, he simply trotted out some broad, you know, he was attempting to bring up the Brady issue, and he was so general and vague. I was like, what are you talking about? You know, it wasn't until Representative Gabbard came to the fore and really brought home some of the problems with her record that she was forced to really defend herself. The same with Cory Booker. You could see him really taking delight in the fact that he brought up his record as the mayor of Newark. Like, thank you. I want to talk about what I did as the mayor of Newark, because you're not really prepared. You think you have this line of attack, but you really don't, because you're lacking some really specific details. The only time I thought that Biden really shined was in his response to climate change and talking about his own plan. He had very specific details about the amount of money he would spend, how he would address fossil fuels and so forth, and he parried off some attacks that were being presented by Governor Inslee. So I think he was prepared more than the last debate, but that's not saying very much, right? And I'll also say that Professor Winkler was my constitutional law professor, so it's nice to be up here so many years later.
Zach, go ahead.
And when it comes to Biden, there are 2 points I want to touch on. And the first is whenever he was attacked, he didn't respond with defending his positions. He responded with an attack. It was an attack of one of the other candidates, or it was an attack of Donald Trump. And we all know Donald Trump is a very low bar. All of the candidates on that stage can beat it. But attacking the other candidates rather than defending his positions, I think shows that his positions either aren't where they need to be, and he knows that, or they're just not fully fleshed out. And second, on the point of Biden apologizing, it seems that he's unable to apologize or doesn't know how when it comes to issues of race, when it comes to issues of gender. But when he was called out for his vote on the Iraq War, he was very quick to accept culpability that he had been duped and that he had made the wrong decision. And that makes me ask, is it that he's unable to or doesn't know how to apologize on issues of race and gender, or is it that he doesn't think he has to apologize because he doesn't actually think he was wrong?
Well, you raised the question of support from black women. And let's talk for a minute about the African-American vote in the Democratic primary, because that segment of the electorate is crucially important in a Democratic primary, especially when the primaries get to states like South Carolina and so on. A very interesting thing happened in the first debate. The confrontation between Harris and Biden was widely perceived to be something that built Harris's support among African Americans. But polling 7 days later revealed something very interesting. Her support went down, and Biden's support went up among African Americans. And the pollsters interpreted that result because of the association between Biden and Obama, that attacks on Biden were perceived disproportionately by African American Democrats as attacks on Obama, and they reacted negatively to that. Do you think that dynamic played a role tonight? And if so, how?
I think it's about candidate electability across the board, whether you're black or non-black. But particularly, just to stay in a moment here with black women, the black women that I talk to who have older black women for the most part who share an affinity towards Obama, that has a positive spillover effect for Biden, right? But also, black women care about making sure that the person that they elect in the primary can win in the general election against Trump. And they care about candidate electability in the same way that they cared about candidate electability when they preferred Clinton over Obama until the first and second primary. And so the bandwagon effect came into play after Obama proved himself to be electable. And so that is something that we need to also never underestimate black women, but never underestimate the extent to which black folks are strategic in the same way that other groups are in terms of favoring the candidate that they see as electable, right, and a viable candidate. And then after that candidate proves that they have viability in the polls with Ohio, with South Carolina, so on and so forth, just like Obama in 2008, you will see the tide begin to shift shift a little bit. And so you're right. There was a great momentum in Kamala Harris's campaign, but the extent to which she can siphon off votes from the little old black women who are standing with Joe until he proves them otherwise, that he is electable, right? And so we'll see. And people ask me, like, well, what am I thinking about Kamala Harris and versus the other candidates? And I am waiting for Ohio. I'm sorry, I'm not Ohio. I'm waiting for Iowa, South Carolina, in terms of candidate electability and in terms of movement in the polls with regards to what may happen there.
And I think there are a couple of other things happening as well. There's also, I think, Lorrie mentioned this, there's a generational issue here, right? So I think younger black women aren't as enamored with Obama as their older counterparts. So I think they're looking very skeptically at Joe Biden. And they're also looking very skeptically at Kamala Harris. So I think both of them actually have a lot of work to do to earn the support of younger black women who are very motivated to vote in this election across the country, but especially in states with large black populations like South Carolina, Georgia, et cetera. I think the other thing that's important to note is the impact of movements that have been led by black women in shaping the discourse of the Democratic debate today. I don't think 8 years ago we would have heard the term white supremacy or white nationalists, had the discussion about criminal justice. And the reason that we had those discussions was because of Black Lives Matter, because of the leadership of black women, one of whom lives here in Los Angeles, Patrisse Cullors. So I think giving credit to younger black women and the leadership that they have put forward in shaping the political discourse and indeed shaping the presidential race is going to be quite significant. And to try to lump all black women together in terms of the national polls, which mostly focus on older black women, I think is a mistake in terms of trying to assess where black women's support lies.
Now, as you pointed out earlier, the first part of the debate was dominated by health care. Almost 50 minutes, I think, were spent debating health care. And much of that debate centered around Senator Harris's proposals. If Senator Harris had been on the podium last night, that health care proposal of hers would have been subjected to very severe criticism by Senators Warren and Sanders. How do you think that the display of her health care proposals stands in comparison, or how will people perceive it in comparison to the two proposals that were advanced and seemed to be much more popular last night? I mean, the fact that she allows insurance companies to be part of the future going forward at least 10 years would seem to me to be a real liability given the nature of the debate last night.
Number one, it's very easy to appear far to the left when immediately to your right is Joe Biden. When it comes to insurance companies, I was shocked to see Bill de Blasio as the most populist candidate on stage, at least in his presentation, talking about how insurance and healthcare as a business model is immoral. I think that we were seeing a lot more of that yesterday, and the public option seemed to be the more popular option on the stage tonight. It would be really fantastic to have Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, all of the frontrunners on the same stage to actually compare and contrast how their policies stand up to one another instead of two knights, one of which is very clearly more left-leaning and the other which is far more to the center.
I'd just say one thing I noticed that, and I think the healthcare is a microcosm of the fact that actually this is a Democratic Party with a lot of ideas and a lot of proposals. And I think for the last 10 years or so, the Democratic Party has often been criticized as being sort of rear guard actions, trying to protect old battles that were won a long time ago, but not having a kind of innovative set of policy proposals. And I think that was one of the things that kind of dogged at least the reputation of Hillary Clinton in the last election. She had policy proposals, but it seemed like she was just running against Donald Trump. And the policy proposals, at the end of the day, people were saying, what did Hillary Clinton stand? What was her campaign? We are seeing in healthcare and in so many other issues, these Democrats really taking a stand and trying to define their candidacies, trying to define the party in a way that is substantive and based around these real policy proposals around healthcare. There are differences in the proposals, to be sure. That's exactly why you want to have these kinds of primary campaigns. Sometimes I think we focus too much on some of the differences, though, because whether we get a Medicare for all that includes a public option, and a public option means it's an option. There's generally also a private option there, too. If that's going to be the case, or if it's not going to be the case, and we're not going to have private insurance, is going to be something that's going to be really worked out when the person is actually in office and trying to get a law passed through Congress. We saw that with the Obama health care reform. It wasn't the exact ideal that he had proposed on the stump. It's what you can get when you get there. And so some of these policy differences are really just about sort of identifying yourself with one wing of the party, but probably won't have as much of an impact when the actual health care plan gets proposed and adopted.
I mean, I felt that Kamala Harris's plan, I think she's trying to position herself sort of like as a green screen where people can project things onto her. So some folks might see her as a progressive, therefore she uses the term Medicare for all when it's not quite that, because she's preserving a role for private insurance, whereas others might see her more as a moderate, and they might focus on the role of private insurance and the role of choice, right? So I think she's trying to essentially toe the line between both of these wings of the party, and to preserve her option of going after the sort of the maximum number of votes. But I think what's interesting about tonight's debate is sort of the inverse of what happened yesterday. Yesterday, I think Joe Biden was very much present in terms of the sort of moderate centrist standard bearer, and tonight both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren were very much present as the sort of standard bearers for the progressive wing of the party. And you saw a whole lot of the candidates talking about whether it was wise or not to take the position of pursuing a progressive vision for America. And again, Kamala Harris, I think, wants to align herself with that because there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of enthusiasm for a progressive vision, but there's also a lot of fear and uncertainty. And so I think she's trying to preserve something that feels safe to people, and therefore she feels safe to people.
Yeah, I got the feeling tonight that people were competing for being the Biden alternative. That Biden's perceived as the leading moderate. He's got 35% of the vote, according to most polls, which also means 65% of the people are not supporting him. And a number of the candidates tonight who were taking a more moderate position seemed to be trying to knock Biden down in anticipation of the fact that he will go down and not survive as the sole moderate. I also thought Cory Booker did a terrific job tonight. And many people began to write him off after the first debate because of a relatively lackluster performance. But tonight he seemed to shine, and I would not be surprised to see his numbers go up tomorrow.
I was surprised that Kirsten Gillibrand, I appreciated her bringing up some of the gender issues with Joe Biden, but it seems as though, in my perspective, that she tried to pull a Kamala Harris from debate one, and it fell flat. It didn't work as effectively and as strongly for her. I mean, the takeaway, I don't think is going to have the same effect when she went after Biden. The two of them seemed to tag team him on the issue of gender pay and equity and women working outside the home, so on and so forth. But it fell flat with regards to comparing it to the first debate.
And I agree. I think Cory Booker was more assertive, more confident. And I think when Joe Biden attempted to sort of take the fight to him, which was sort of inexplicable why he was doing that on his record as the mayor of Newark, I think he was very good in terms of really turning that back on Joe Biden in terms of his responsibility for the major crime bill and his responsibility for the growth of certainly the federal prison population, but certainly its influence on state prison and jail populations. And so noting that, listen, I was cleaning up your mess, right? And I did a good job of it, right? So I think that he did a a very good job of tying Biden to mass incarceration, even as Biden was trying to extricate himself from responsibility. Again, he could apologize, which he's refused to do. I thought, surprisingly, Jay Inslee did a good job.
Yes.
On it, even though it seemed to me like he was the climate change person, he seemed to do a very good job of talking about his qualifications in a number of areas, including criminal justice, including education, including his record on health care as the governor in the state of Washington. So I was actually very impressed by Governor Inslee. I knew nothing about him. I'm actually like, maybe I should go Google him. I'm going to take his invitation to go to his website.
And I was going to say, one thing to think about is while there are those who are trying to seem like they're the alternative to Biden, for most of the people on that stage, what they were really trying to do is just get into the next debate. And it's about staying alive. And there are 7 of those 10 people on the stage tonight who have not qualified for the September Democratic debate. And several of those 7 probably are not going to qualify at the end of the day. That's Bennet, Gabbard, Inslee, de Blasio, Yang, Gillibrand, and Castro. None of them have qualified for that next one. I think much of the debate was for each of those candidates to try to make a statement, have a moment, have something that propels them to move forward. And I think some accomplished that with some varying success, although maybe there was never that one moment that really is going to turn the tide for any of those candidates at the very bottom looking up.
Yeah, Adam, I think that's exactly right. I mean, the people you mentioned and others were just trying to make enough of an impression to get a little bit of bounce in the polling, and a little bit of bounce in terms of number of donors. Do you all know what the criteria are to get into the next debate? No. You have to have at least 2% support in at least 4 independent polls in order to qualify. And in addition to that, you have to have 130,000 donors, and those donors must include 400 people at a minimum from each of 20 states. And as Adam pointed out, I think there are only 6 who actually meet that criteria right now. There's some controversy about Yang because he claims 4 polls, but the DNC says only 3. But in any case, the next debate is going to be much smaller than the debates we've had. Yeah. And with 6 in, there may be 8 or 9 by the time we get to September when the next debate is scheduled. But it's going to be very interesting to see which of those second and third tier candidates get the little bit of bounce they were all trying to achieve tonight.
And one of the interesting things is that we're actually going to see the elimination of most of the white guys from the Democratic Party debates. Joe Biden, obviously, as the front runner, is still going to be there. But when you look at the people who are atop the polls, and it's Kamala Harris, and Cory Booker is one of those people who's made it into the next debate. Bernie Sanders will still be there, of course. So it's not that there's none, but the Jay Inslees, the John Delaney's, the Hickenloopers. There's a lot of sort of white guys running at the very margins, and I think we're going to see a real diverse set of candidates in the next round of debates, with fewer of the marginal candidates there trying to make their points.
Two of the candidates that were frequently contrasted with each other previous to these 2 debates were Castro and O'Rourke, with O'Rourke appearing to decrease or to go down in support after the first debate. He didn't seem to do much good for himself last night. How do you feel about Castro in comparison? Did he do well enough in this debate to possibly move into that September debate with the others?
I was here last night and I was watching with the crowd and also thinking, how did Beto make it this far? Because again, the second chance, it still fell flat, and the comparison has been to Castro, and I think that he had a performance that would allow him to hopefully maintain some support and have a little bit of a boost in the polls, but perhaps not enough to make it into the next round. I think he stood his ground. He had some great policy positions, and his ability to articulate his policy positions and bring in a diversity of opinions and groups. His immigration proposals have been really celebrated by a lot of folks who are in the immigrant rights movement, and so he's able to really bring to bear some of the policy proposals that can be helpful to the Democratic Party, and I hope that they become a part of the Democratic Party platform, whether he makes it or not. So for Castro, the work that he's doing for the Democratic Party and leading on issues like immigration, leading on issues like bringing to bear the Black Lives Matter, other kinds of equity that we need, bringing those issues to the fore have been helpful. So I'm not sure if he's going to make it to the next debate, but I do know that in the immigration rights and other kinds of policy proposals where it comes to folks of color, his policy proposals have been celebrated, and I hope that many of those solutions make it into the Democratic Party platform.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that he's contrasted against Beto O'Rourke because, frankly, I don't really understand why O'Rourke is running, other than he had a great campaign against Ted Cruz in Texas. But I think there's more substance to Castro than there is to O'Rourke. And I thought in the first debate, I thought Castro did an amazing job with articulating his vision for the future and articulating his case for why he's running for president. There seems to be a real substance there. And I heard from a lot of, especially women of color who I talked to, that they really appreciated the way that he talked about, for example, reproductive justice, and was really specifically talking to women of color and in particular regarding some of the specific concerns that women of color have around childbirth, around housing, around, which is obviously an area where he has some expertise. And then tonight, I thought and again, he specifically defended women of color who are being attacked by the president. In his opening statement, he said, we're not going back to where we came from, we're going forward. And he was the first person, I think, specifically that said, Donald Trump is a racist. I don't think anybody else was as pointed in saying that. So I think that he's very clear about cultivating support among people of color, obviously having a very strong immigration platform. I think he's being very deliberate and I think very smart in that, particularly in the Democratic primary. So I think given the way in which his campaign is developing, we might see him in the next debate, because he is being very deliberate in cultivating support among people of color, but especially women of color who form the base of the Democratic electorate.
Well, I hope he gets a boost, because O'Rourke will be in the next debate, given his fundraising and his polling stature. He made the point, or made much of the point last night, that Texas has 38 electoral votes, and that based on the campaign he ran there for Senate, he has a chance to move Texas into the Democratic column, which of course would tilt the election in favor of the Democrats. But I fail to understand how that argument doesn't also apply to Castro, who is also from Texas and who's connected to one of the more progressive elements of the Texas electorate, the Latino community around San Antonio, and South Texas. So let's hope that his polling goes up enough for him to qualify in that debate as well.
Well, many of us are concerned about the Senate, and we're concerned about Mitch McConnell, and we're concerned about the extent to which these candidates, we believe in a democracy, we believe in choice, but the longer the candidates who are polling at 1 or 2% stay on, the fewer time and resources that we're expending towards taking back the Senate. And I understand that, when we're in June or July of previous primary cycles, that we can't necessarily trust the polls and that things change very rapidly. But we're in a different day and time with more at stake than ever before in our democracy, and we need to focus on the Senate. And many of these candidates who are hanging on, like Beto and others, who could be viable, strong, dynamic candidates for the Senate. And I'm very concerned about the extent to which we want, great choice and we want to hear the voices, but the extent to which we're expending time and resources, where time and resources also need to be spent, on winning the Senate.
And the other thing that I think that, yes, absolutely. The other thing that's been puzzling to me is how little the Supreme Court has been discussed. So Julián Castro, in his remarks about his proposals around criminal justice reform, talked about policing. And two of the things that he talked about was changing the use of force standard, which I think is absolutely right, and changing the standards around qualified immunity, both of which are legal standards and legal constructs that were created by, surprise, the Supreme Court. Issues related to health care, all of which will land before the Supreme Court: abortion, reproductive rights, racial justice, voting rights, all will be at some point or another before the Supreme Court, and not a single candidate talked about how they would, first of all, why it's important to defeat Donald Trump related to the court, and then how they would, in fact, choose Supreme Court justices. I think maybe Mayor Pete is the only one that's talked about sort of an aggressive Supreme Court strategy, and that seems to me a mistake.
I want to touch on Castro's criminal justice, because I think he was touching on threads that the other candidates were missing there, as well as in the immigration policy. On criminal justice, most of the other candidates were focusing on the legal system and on the courts. Castro actually talked about reforming the way people police. And in regards to immigration as well, he didn't just talk about the crisis at the border and decriminalizing people who cross illegally. He also talked about a Marshall Plan for Central America, for Nicaragua. And these are important issues to tie together because, like we talked about yesterday, they don't exist in a vacuum. And on top of that, Castro's rhetoric, for me at least, is evocative of Obama in timbre and in delivery. And I think if he can keep that up, he stands a very good chance of moving up in the polls.
And I think this is an important piece to lift up in terms of how the candidates talk about criminal justice reform on the one hand and immigration on the other. One of the things that I heard from a number of the candidates both yesterday and today is, we need to decriminalize border crossings, immigration, because these people aren't criminals. People in immigration detention shouldn't be crowded into cages. They shouldn't be forced to drink out of toilets. They shouldn't, it's all these horrible, inhumane things because they are not criminals. People who are convicted of crimes shouldn't be treated like this either, right? So no one should be treated like this. And I think that we should really be pushing the candidates or elected representatives to reject this dichotomy that they're drawing between people who are convicted of crimes and people who are not. Because we need to, especially given that they are pushing criminal justice reforms that are trying to promote humane policies. So we either have humane policies for everyone, whether you're a citizen or not, whether you've been convicted of a crime or not, or we aren't. And so I think we just need to be very clear about that as we talk about these issues.
Are there questions or comments from the floor? Because we should open this up, and I believe there are handheld mics that will be made available to people who do have questions.
We wanted to know, who are the six? You said the six, and we needed clarification. 6 or 7, can you name this?
Yeah, Biden, Sanders, Warren, Buttigieg, Harris, and Booker. Oh, I'm sorry, and O'Rourke. And O'Rourke. So there would be 7. You were right, Adam. Yes, sir.
Please wait for the mic.
Can you bring the mic down here for this gentleman?
I was just curious to know whether or not you're going to be doing this again in September, having this kind of presentation.
That's a question for Claudia, not for us. She is our hostess tonight, and I do not know if there are plans to do this again.
It depends how much you buy in the museum gift shop downstairs.
Uh-huh.
So on your way out, make sure you get something.
There's another question down here. Oh, I'm sorry, you're back there. Okay, go ahead.
Actually, I'd like to make a plea to think about language. To everyone on the stage, everyone in the audience, and talk to your friends. One of the words matter. And I keep hearing about attacks. They're really criticisms. This should be a discussion, what's going on in the debates and what all of us are doing. They aren't, for us to talk about and disagree is not an attack. It's a discussion, it's a critique, and I think we have to de-escalate the language to make it safer for people. And I think we have to be really careful because Republicans are very good at shaping language. They pay a lot of attention. They determine the names for things, and they determine the language that's used, and the news media keep picking it up. And we all need to think about, do we really want to use that language? Thank you.
Point well taken.
Question for the panel. So last night we had a question about gun control, but we didn't see one tonight, even though it's only 3 days since our last mass shooting. Do you think this is an important topic for the Democratic candidates to cover, or if it'll just hurt us in the general election? It's just a hugely important issue to me, and I don't know if where its place is in this election, in this debate.
Well, I mean, this is definitely an issue that I think the Democratic Party leadership is really struggling with. On the one hand, gun control has emerged as a really important, energizing issue for the base of the Democratic Party. There's a lot of energy around gun reform right now, money going into it, people volunteering, a lot of mobilization and activism. The party really likes that. At the same time, Democratic leaders in Congress are not eager to embrace gun control laws that are going to adversely affect Democratic prospects in swing states. You know, for 30 years, it was the received wisdom in the Democratic Party that we don't talk about gun control on Election Day because we need those swing state districts. So I think right now the Democratic Party really has a certain conflict there. They want to get the swing state voters in the swing state districts where guns have often played in the hands of Republicans. At the same time, this is an issue that really energizes a lot of the base. I think we might have seen more of the discussion tonight had the moderators really focused more questioning on gun violence prevention. I think a lot of the candidates on the stage do want to do more to prevent gun violence, and most of them do have plans to do so.
And I think also, you know, there was a lot of criticism yesterday about sort of, and even tonight, about adopting Republican talking points, speaking to the point about language. You know, to believe, you know, pundits and talking heads, you know, you think, you know, gun control was a Democratic issue and, you know, proliferation of guns was a Republican position, and it's not. Most people in this country, I think it's like 70%, want sensible gun control. And it's in fact the parties that are imposing restrictions on our ability to do that. So I do hope in the future that the Democratic Party and the leadership will actually say that this is not a partisan issue, that most people want to be able to send their kids to school, want to be able to go to work at a university or go to school at a university without worrying about a mass shooting, or go to an event, or go to a public park without worrying that they could be shot down randomly, right? These are basic things that all of us want, is to be able to move about our lives safely and not have AR, you know, I don't know what they're called, 47s, 50, 49s, whatever they are, assault rifles in our communities. So I think that we need to really say that very clearly. This is not a partisan issue. Most Americans want sensible gun control. And I think yesterday there was one candidate in particular who made gun control a salient part of, I think, I'm not sure what his name was, probably one of the people who's going to be bumped off in terms of the next round of debates. But I think one candidate in particular was very clear that this is my issue, and so it certainly came up. That wasn't the case tonight. Right.
But this issue is an example of a larger question for the Democratic Party. As de Blasio said in his opening remarks tonight, are we going to be a party of bold ideas and innovative programs, or are we going to be a party that takes the cautious route to victory in every election in which we face? Gun control is one issue, but so is single-payer health care, so is a new immigration policy. I mean, there are a lot of issues that Democrats have been reluctant to talk about in the past that the public is demanding they talk about now, and there's great trepidation about how far one goes in advocating some of those bold programs without losing a lot of the independent, moderate vote in the middle that's necessary to win elections.
Can I jump in on that? I just want to add, to emphasize that. I mean, I think we've seen both last night and tonight, there's a real divide in the Democratic Party between those who are sort of big vision, big, bold thinkers who want to sort of play a role in inspiring people to get out to vote. And there's a bunch of much more moderate candidates who are sort of want to inch along or who think that the boldest plans are impossible and thus should be avoided. And I think it ties into a larger, Biden said at one point, this is a debate for the soul of America. But this debate was really, in many ways, a debate over the soul of the Democratic Party. When Clinton was elected in '92, after 3 straight Democratic defeats in '80, '84, and '88, the idea was Democrats needed to move towards the center. You needed those Southern Democrats. You needed those people who were going to appeal to those moderates. But the story of the Obama election of '08 and of 2012, in political science circles at least, is really more about mobilizing the base. Not about appealing to the middle, but appealing to the more extreme elements of your party, the base who's going to turn out to vote. And if you can get them to turn out to vote, you're going to win. And I think the Democrats, that's part of the debate that's happening here. Do we want to have someone who's going to really appeal to the base and get that base out? Or is it someone who's going to appeal to the moderate middle and get those voters? I don't know what the right answer is to that question, but I think that's a big part of what's going on on that debate stage.
Well, this is a historic disagreement within the Democratic Party. Do you win elections by expanding the electorate and getting more non-voters to the polls on election day, or do you win elections by speaking to the people who normally vote?
Hi, my name is Isaac Lieberman. I'm a registered nurse. And my question is kind of following on to the language issues we were talking about earlier, choice and options. The panelists are understandably falling into the trap of using the deceptive right-wing Republican language, equating private insurance companies with more healthcare choices. Private insurance companies reduce choice. That is the main thing that they do. Medicare for All, as proposed by Bernie Sanders, gives everyone full 100% choice of who to go to, what doctor, what hospital, what provider, because every provider is covered. As soon as you go to the other system, that those who are shilling for the health insurance industry and create a public option and a private option, where they're all pretending this gives more choice, it's a lie. It gives less choice. So my question is, how can we as citizens, you as panelists, help us undercut that lie and make it clear to the public and then hopefully to the Democratic candidates that we see through that lie and they've got to stop using it?
Yeah, I think I use that term. And I used it because I think that's the way Kamala Harris is calibrating her platform in terms of the sort of so-called Medicare for All, which is not exactly what it is. But I think part of the problem is, even though most of us have some kind of interaction with healthcare, we actually don't know how it works, right? So part of it is we do need to have some kind of public education around how the economy of public health and healthcare functions in this country. And most people understand how their plan works. Most people understand how their health plan affects them, but they don't understand the macro dynamics of it. And so I think the points that you're making are really important.
I think they understand how
Please wait for the mic.
Insurance company has functioned for them so far. But the vast majority of people like their health insurance because, thank God, they haven't had a catastrophic health crisis. That's when people discover, oh, I'm not covered with this Cadillac plan like I thought I was. Now I'm bankrupt. But that's how insurance works. Very few people actually have to use it in that way.
I think my colleague wanted to respond.
I'm really glad you asked that question, and I think it's a very theoretical question as well. When it comes to choice, it's often equated with freedom, but having more choice doesn't always mean you're more free. If you get sick and you have to choose between putting food on the table and getting the medicine you need to survive, that makes you less free. The choices of private insurance often leave people uninsured, still paying absurd premiums out of pocket every time they go to the hospital, every time they go to the doctor. And if people didn't have to choose their health care, if they just had their health care as a right and could go to the doctor whenever they needed it, that's another choice they don't have to deal with. And that frees them up to do what they want, whether it's their hobbies, whether it's seeking a job. But I also think the important distinctions that were made today are on the employers. And the employers are forced to manage the health care for their employees. And if we take that off the backs of the employers, it frees up more of their money. It frees up the unions to negotiate for higher wages instead of for better insurance. And it gives more choices in other realms.
And just expanding on that point very briefly, choice may be a straw man in this debate. And precisely because people don't understand how the healthcare system works, how are they able and how can they feel confident in making choices between various healthcare plans that they basically don't understand? The real issue here, I think, underlying this and more fundamental than choice is cost. The Republican talking point is always, aren't you going to have to raise taxes to pass a single-payer healthcare system? And when the American public hears raising taxes, they run for the door. And where we have failed most fundamentally is getting across the idea that yes, taxes will go up, but because premiums will no longer be paid, net cost to everybody in the system will be less. And until we get that point across to the electorate, until they understand that they will no longer be paying premiums to health insurance, for-profit health insurance companies, it's going to be difficult to get around that Republican talking point of this is going to increase your tax bill.
But this is exactly why we need to have this discussion and why the debates are important in this regard, because the ultimate candidate, the Democratic candidate, has to be ready for the attacks and for the kind of language that will reach across, will reach outside of Westwood, will reach outside the halls of academia, will reach into Michigan and Pennsylvania and Ohio, to folks who are afraid of their taxes going up, even if they're dealing with a debilitating illness of their own. So they have to figure out the messaging, right? And then the messaging doesn't have to be an attack like the way we were all uncomfortable on the front row when CNN started in with like we were at a WWF fight. The very first thing that came on the screen as the panelists, as the candidates came out, it was as though, I mean, this isn't really what I necessarily anticipated that CNN would do, but it's a corporation and they're trying to get their ratings, right? And they're shaping the narrative in that way. It may make us uncomfortable, but it definitely had people tuning in. So that's a big part of it. But that doesn't have to necessarily be the message that we put forward. But I would say that we do have to, whether it makes us uncomfortable or not, the candidates have to be able to articulate their positions come April, May, where we are moving into the general election. I mean, this is the time that we hash it out among ourselves as Democrats and choosing the best candidate that will articulate a message that will reach outside of the Democratic Party.
She's had her hand up.
Okay, how does this work? Is it working? Okay. I want to go back to something in the gun discussion that the professor mentioned about why so many people are for gun control, and yet when they get to Congress, nothing happens. And it's because of the money that is paid to the people to get elected. Then when they get there, they become eunuchs because they have to worry about where the money's going to come for the next election. And my point is, and you guys, I would like to hear what you think about this. This is true for all the issues, not just gun control. It's true for health. It's true for education. Just look at the corrupt people that we have right now. And when are the Democrats, if they get elected, how are they going to deal with that?
The best way to deal with that would be federally funded elections. And if Democrats get control of both houses of Congress and the White House, we'd have a chance to bring that about. But you're absolutely right. Until you get money out of politics, you will have posturing politicians promising you things that they will be unable to deliver once they're elected.
The airwaves belong to all of us.
They do indeed.
But I think the other issue, you know, obviously money is a big issue, but I think the other issue is how political districts are drawn. And, you know, the Supreme Court recently handed down a decision basically saying, you know, we don't play a role in partisan gerrymandering. And the problem with partisan gerrymandering is that, you know, you create safe seats for Republicans, you create safe seats for Democrats. And that means that there really isn't a real contrast in ideas. The districts aren't diverse. And so then people in primaries are running for the most extreme position. So that means in Republican primaries, they're running, you know, absolutely pro-gun, and that doesn't leave a lot of room for compromise, right? Because people are constantly worried that if I take a position that I'm going to vote for a bill that puts in place some reasonable gun control measures, the NRA will primary me because there is a rock-solid Republican majority in my district that has been gerrymandered. So it's money, but it's also how districts are drawn. And so the census is important. It's also our courts. It's state legislatures. So we need to be focusing on state legislatures because they draw districts, and those districts determine who we send to Congress and how extreme or not our candidates are, or our representatives are.
Say it again about the census and the importance of the census, because if we don't have a strong count in California, then all of the repercussions for which you name are going to bring to bear for the state of California. So we definitely need to say that again with regards to the census.
Can you bring a mic down?
Yeah. Hi. So you were talking about the Medicare for All. The insurance companies, what's going on with the insurance companies there's actually two. There's nonprofit insurance companies and there's for-profit insurance companies. And because of the tax breaks that they got for the for-profit insurance companies, they have more money in their coffers, so they have been buying down the rates, but it's artificial right now. So eventually that's going to go away. So there are issues that are going to come to pass that people are not even aware of because there's the for-profit insurance and there's nonprofit. The other part of it is you're talking about the Medicare for All. There are California Physicians Alliance, and they are for that. So they have created a roadmap to how to get to that point. It's very extensive. They're also creating a calculator to show how much you're going to save by using a Medicare for All program. So this calculator is coming up, but they've already put out this extensive plan for how to get to that roadmap to do that.
What is the name of the group again?
California Physicians Alliance. They just had a...
and they can be Googled.
They can be Googled. They're nonprofit.
Okay. Thank you.
They had a celebration for Medicare over the weekend. Very knowledgeable. Most of the coverage for health here in California, 70% of it is already sponsored by the government, it turns out. They have all the data, so most of it's been written by physicians with accurate data about that. And so you can Google them and see their roadmap, and eventually you'll see their calculator for Medicare savings if you use the Medicare for All savings.
Okay, some questions here.
I have two comments. First of all, when you said black women were very forgiving, I was the very loud no. I don't care about apologies. I want action. I want proof in the pudding. I want you to put your money where your mouth is. Just do it. Just if you've done something wrong, atone for your sins and keep going forward. That's what I want. None of this make Joe apologize. Dems threw Al Franken under the bus. I'm over something completely stupid. I mean, he had proof that he moved forward and done things for us, and we lost a very good ally. And then my other thing is, everyone wants Medicare for all and socialized medicine and everything like that. However, have you spoken to anyone from Europe where they have socialized medicine and there's long wait times? There are people who do have their private health care, but there are also long wait times in the NHS. Do you watch Questions to Prime Minister? The Labor and Tories are always going back and forth saying, oh, we've shortened wait times, which were longer with you guys. People need to stop looking at this pretty little bauble and look at things and actually talk to people who've experienced it, not just the nice, pretty, good ideas.
Someone in the back there is very anxious to respond to that. Can you give her a mic, please?
All right, but I had a question. The ushers bring the things around to people in order. And I took the liberty of asking the next question, sorry.
Okay.
My question for the panelists relates to the November 2019 election and the importance of state elections and state legislation that you brought up before. But I will couch it this way. For each panelist, would you prefer to have a Democratic House or a Democratic president, and why?
I would say the Democratic president at this point is vitally important. The Republican president, if there's a Republican in the White House and has the support of a Senate like President Trump has, he becomes very, very powerful. And
Sorry, I meant all of Congress. I didn't just mean the House.
well, I think, if you have all of the House, all of the Congress, both the House and the Senate, but you don't have the White House, you're not going to get very many laws passed because you're not going to have a supermajority most likely. And reverse, if you have the White House and you don't have the other branches of government, you've got nothing. What we're really going to have from what it looks like from most assessments is that we're going to have a Democratic House and we're going to have a Republican Senate. And then the question is who should be occupying the White House in that situation? I think one of the things you gotta, if we go back to something that Professor Ocen said about the courts and focusing on the courts, Donald Trump has already put on 2 Supreme Court justices that are going to have a huge impact on American law for the next 35 years. He's appointed 100 of the 700 existing federal court judgeships. If he wins office for another 4 years, he'll probably have appointed about 1/3 to 40% of the entire federal judiciary with really conservative jurists who are going to be really hostile to democratic reforms. And you can get all the democratic reforms that you want. If the Supreme Court and the federal courts are decidedly against you in those reforms, they're not going to survive. And so it's vitally important that the next president be a Democrat to stop the invasion of the courts and the takeover of the courts by the Trump administration.
Sorry, go ahead. No, I would also agree. I would, for the same reasons, but also because we've seen the enlargement of the power of the executive, for good or bad. I would say for bad. I don't think it's good that we have such a powerful president, but nevertheless, here we are. And so we can see how much damage Donald Trump has done acting unilaterally, acting through his executive authority internationally in terms of our foreign policy, but also acting in terms of executive orders with regard to immigration, with regards to travel bans, with regards to environmental protection, racial justice. I mean, the list can go on in terms of his use of executive authority, circumventing the Congress, and you have a weak Congress that is unwilling to provide a check. And so in that circumstance, both with the Congress and with regard to the power of the president to issue executive orders and negotiate foreign policy, I would take the presidency any day of the week.
Definitely the presidency with regards to the courts. And also, I'm going to go back to my statement about the Senate. We need to start focusing our attention on the Senate. Today we had, for the Congress, about how many? 5 congressmen declare their retirement. We had 5 congressmen, maybe 6, declare their intent to retire from the Congress. We need to really get in action and get in gear about our ability to run successful campaigns that are well funded. If I don't want to, I also wanted to just note a little bit, just go back to your statement or make a response to your statement. And I agree wholeheartedly. Maybe perhaps I was a little bit glib about Black women being forgiven. And let me just note that across all of the candidates, including Kamala Harris, and some of the things that she's done, so she's been criticized for with regards to truancy and her role as a prosecutor. Black women are asking across the board for Joe Biden with regards to Anita Hill. They're asking for Kamala Harris to atone for things that you may have made mistakes before in some of your long history. Joe Biden has 40 years of policy making, but skating it and making excuses for it doesn't do anything to shore up Black women voters, right? But it will turn them away. So perhaps they are not necessarily forgiving, but they will sort of say, I agree with some of your policy statements, but not others. For example, a lot of African American women didn't agree with same-sex marriage, right? But they still upheld the overall policies of the Obama administration and helped to lead to his 2012 reelection. And so in terms of understanding that Black women don't want you to just keep sort of pushing the can down the road and not atone for what happened in the Senate when Joe Biden was overseeing the Anita Hill versus Clarence Thomas hearing. But have a conversation about it and don't continue to skate it. In the same way that Kamala Harris is having some difficulties with Black women voters, particularly young Black women voters, right? Who see her as a viable candidate, right? But they see that there are some things in the state of California that she needs to atone for, and that she needs to have a consistent message across all groups. And that message has to be the same on Sunday during church as it is when you are speaking to a business council. It needs to be a consistent message across all groups. If not, it's just pandering.
I did want a chance to answer Claudia's question as well. And Claudia, I want to answer it by refusing the question. The courts are incredibly important. Foreign policy is incredibly important. The power of war is incredibly important. That lies in the presidency. But we also saw how tied Obama's hands were when we lost the House and Senate in the midterms, and how he was not able to accomplish any of the agenda that we put him in office to do. So my answer to your question is, I think we should have our cake and eat it too. I think we should win it all back, and it's going to take a lot of work. I also wanted to backtrack on the point of healthcare. You asked if we ask people in Europe what they think of their systems, and I was born in Canada. I have dual citizenship. I still go back to Canada every now and again. 2 years ago, I broke my arm 2 days before my employer-sponsored healthcare kicked in. And that was here in Los Angeles. And I would have much rather been in Canada when that happened, because I had to wait 2 days and sleep on a broken arm so that I wouldn't be bankrupt because I didn't have private health insurance yet. But when there are wait lists, it's for things that aren't urgent. It's for things that aren't life-threatening. And it's for things that you'll be able to keep going. There might be some discomfort. Worst case scenario, you might have a colonoscopy bag for a couple of months. But when there are life-threatening illnesses, they get people treated, and people are never worried about going bankrupt for their health care. Those who can't afford it in Canada and Europe often will get private health care to avoid the lines, but that's when it's a procedure that they're selecting, whether it's cosmetic or something that they want to do to improve their comfort while they wait for other people who need the care more urgently to get the care that they need.
Go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity. I just wanted to also say I agreed about with whoever, I forget who said this, but Cory Booker really, he improved upon his performance from the previous debate, and seems so much more confident, I think, this time around, whereas he was more nervous looking that first debate as well. And he seemed to, 2 or 3 times, if you notice, he tried to rise above, when the kids were bickering, he almost seemed like he was the adult saying, okay, well, we're playing into the Republicans' hands. We shouldn't be doing this. This is what they want us to do. Let's just show that we can be more united. That's kind of what I took from it. And also, you didn't mention Andrew Yang so much, but I liked how he had this, he not only does he understand that the $1,000 a month is going to be important to a lot of working Americans, and especially the ones that are, there's so many Americans who are struggling today. And he mentioned how, brilliantly, how it would help with the entrepreneurial, effort for, like the waitress he mentioned, who might have a brilliant idea and be able to use it, to lift herself. It's empowering, as opposed to just getting something that he wants to help people to help themselves, and that was inspiring. And my question is, I'm getting to that. I also feel that he could have added, though, perhaps unemployment for the self-employed. That would have also perhaps been something additional he could have added. And also, I wanted to know how what each of the panelists think about as far as what you think the electorate will do if they, setting aside, wanting to vote for someone who's electable, okay, setting that aside for now, if they will vote for, do you think, their values, what they care about more, or their pocketbook? Because, this is very important too. It could lift a lot of people out of homelessness. That $1,000 could help people who are from falling into homelessness, which is a huge problem in this country too.
I thought Andrew Yang was a really interesting candidate tonight. On the one hand, a sort of marginal candidate who doesn't seem to have a lot of chance, but I thought a really interesting perspective on a lot of issues. I mean, he does seem a little bit like a one-trick pony. How are you going to solve health care? $1,000 a month. How are you going to solve racial justice? $1,000 a month. Pay equity? $1,000 a month. He really just has that one policy. He's sort of the candidate of simplicity, right? Just give people $1,000, tax Amazon, and we're good, people.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he brought a lot of important issues. Well, not a lot. I think he brought like two issues that were important to the fore, which is the change in the economy related to automation, right? And he brought that forward in a number of critical moments. So, for example, when the immigration conversation came up, right? He was like, immigrants are being scapegoated. The issue is that the economy is being restructured, and it's corporations that are doing so by eliminating and making workers superfluous, eliminating whole sectors of the economy by automating, and we need to talk about that, right? So he made that important point, I think, at a critical time in the debate. He also said something that I don't think enough people talk about, which is giving people money to keep them out of prison and to keep them out of jail. And folks laugh at that, but it actually works. It was done in Richmond, California. Young men were given money, and surprisingly, they didn't sell drugs. Why? Because people were selling drugs because there was absolutely no legitimate, but very little in terms of legitimate economy in their community that they could participate in. So they actually had a source of support that could meet their needs, which meant that they didn't have to engage in the underground economy. So he's making points that I think people are laughing at, but they actually have a lot of substance to them. So I hope that people actually do take some of his ideas seriously and really listen to some of his critiques about really what he's saying is the failure of modern capitalism.
One final question, please. Speaking of the Senate and Moscow Mitch, there's been quite a few names called against him, but it seems like Moscow Mitch has really stuck with him. And I'm just wondering why is that so irritating to him? Because he's aligned with Trump, and Trump is aligned with the Russians. So why is that so irritating to him? I would think it would be rather natural. And also, I think we really need to focus on that race also in Kentucky. So I totally agree that we're overlooking the Senate. Yeah.
There's a saying that folks that I've heard, at least I think a lot of older, especially black folks say, which is, and I think a lot of Southern folks, which is that hit dogs will holler, which is that when a dog gets kicked, they will yelp, right? So it actually landed, which is why he's reacting. So the saying is a hit dog will holler. And so he got hit, and it actually is substantive critique, and so he's responding to it.
I love the chutzpah, though, of him to say, this is modern-day McCarthyism, in light of the fact that Republicans have been calling Democrats socialists for the last 10 years in everything they do, which is actual McCarthyism.
You know, we complain a lot about the number of candidates debating, 20 different candidates debating, and how awkward and clumsy it is. But think about the other side of that opinion, because when we get down to 7 candidates or 8 candidates in September, we're not going to hear Andrew Yang talking about guaranteed annual income. We're not going to hear candidates talking about ending the filibuster or ending the Electoral College or expanding the Supreme Court, some of the fundamental structural changes that we probably will have to consider in the long run if we're going to improve government in this country. So there's a good aspect to having 20 people up there, because you get ideas thrown out that we're not going to hear after September when the field is narrowed to 7 or 8. Nobody's going to take the dangerous positions that some of the candidates were willing to take at this point to make a name for themselves. I take it we're done? Was that the last question? There's a gentleman here who's been trying to ask a question for some time. Let's give him a chance.
Thank you. I don't need
There's a mic coming.
Okay, I'll use it.
There it is.
Here it is. Thank you. Just quickly, how can we give forgiveness to Kamala Harris if I'm right that she gave a free pass to Steve Mnuchin when he pulled out from under, his company pulled out from under thousands of black homeowners in California, and apparently in underhanded, possibly illegal ways, and she called off any investigation of that. Is my understanding of that correct, or have I got that completely wrong?
No, I think you are correct, and I don't think she's going to get away with it. I think that issue is going to be raised in the course of her campaign.
And she's going to have to know how to address it. The extent to which that she can move past it, have a consistent message about it, and for which I'm not convinced that she's been, even during the debate, I wrote down, we're in hour 2, and I'm very surprised that no one has brought Kamala Harris to task on her record as a prosecutor. We were at least 10 minutes into the second hour of the debate. And so the good part about the debates are that it gives an opportunity for candidates to help the American public understand their positions, to smooth out the rough edges as they get ready to debate in the general election. So when I note in terms of forgiveness, I am specifically noting that you're not going to get everything you want in a candidate. So if Kamala Harris rises to be the Democratic presidential nominee, if it happens in that way, and it's not Elizabeth, right, or Bernie, or Biden, right, that there will be some things in this mixed bag of this candidate that you want. Some people want to have a woman of color. Some people want a woman. Some people want someone who they feel can fight it out with Trump on stage, right? So that your particular policy issue that you care deeply about, the question will become, if she is pitted against Trump, will that be enough for you to overlook so that you can support her in a general election?
I would be profoundly disappointed in a Democratic Party that allowed her to reach the position where I had to forgive her for that.
And I think
I don't have to do that for Bernie or Elizabeth.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what she's going to have to contend with. And you as a voter, you have that agency and right to say no to her. I'm going to choose Bernie or Elizabeth over her. But the point that I'm making is that there are a lot of other folks in the electorate that want something else in the bundle of what she's offering. They want a woman of color. They want a woman, period, that this is the woman's time, right? And so there are some things that some people, if the messaging is correct and they at least say that they understand why people are dismayed by their previous policy positions or their actions as a prosecutor. But she is going to have a consistent message and atone for some of these things and not ignore them, because in fact some people are going to be willing to overlook that for the bigger picture of defeating Trump, if they believe that that's the case, that she can do it.
But to your point about will she rise to be the nominee without her record being vetted, around this issue of her, especially her prosecutorial record around Steve Mnuchin, or the issue around the Brady violations, or, for example, her introducing legislation to prosecute parents, particularly Black women, whose children, there's a case where a mother's child didn't go to school because she was suffering from sickle cell, and she was trotted out on national television, not national, but local television, and humiliated, for ridiculous reasons. How Kamala Harris turned to the criminal justice system to deal with basic social issues was the point that Cory Booker was making. I think people have been very polite at this juncture, right? Because there's so many candidates, and folks have focused on Joe Biden. But I think as the field winnows, and you see, it winnowed down to 3 or 4, and if Kamala Harris is still among that group, I think those questions will emerge. I think she'll have to contend. She'll have to contend with that. She'll have to respond. She'll have to explain herself and or apologize and say why she made those choices and why she's learned better. And if people are satisfied, then maybe they'll vote for her. And I will say, I don't think people are making choices now exclusively because they think, I want to vote for a woman. I think people are thinking about that. I think people are thinking, it would be nice to have a person of color, but I don't think that's exclusively it. I think people are thinking, who best can represent my ideas? Who can best represent my values? If it happens to be a person of color, if it happens to be a woman, so be it. But if that person of color or a woman is oppositional to my values, I'm not going to vote for them simply because of that fact. And I think Black women especially, I think are very pragmatic in that way, and that's reflected in, their support for Joe Biden.
All right, let's let that be the closing statement for the evening. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.